There we are. All right, now it's official. We're recording. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad that you could be here. And uh, I really like, Dan, as you said earlier, good moment for wherever you are in the world, if it's good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope that you have been having a lovely day. And I'm excited, Dan, that we get to present together. The Dan is somebody that I regard as our nation's top ethicist, especially when it comes to AI and understanding how to incorporate this into our practice. And so I have a couple of thoughts that I'm excited to share just about the practical stuff as I've been getting in there and understanding how to add these tools safely and securely and respecting my patient's privacy and confidentiality. And but Dan, there's a lot of what you're sharing that I'm very excited about. Anyway, so this should be a really good informative session. I'm glad that you all can be here today. You want to add anything to that, Dan?
No, no, not, it's just a difficult introduction to live up to.
No pressure, no pressure.
No. Well, we haven't really coordinated much about this at all, so it'll be interesting to see how what we say meshes.
Right.
But before we get started, let me say that I'm going to use some slides because, of course, everybody has to have slides these days. You can't get by without them. But I probably won't be able to monitor the chat very well while I'm talking with the slides. But I
I got
don't
it.
not only do I not mind going off on tangents, I kind of like it.
Yeah.
Um, and my goal here today is to leave you with something that's useful. So if you have a comment or a question or you want to interject, please don't be shy. Just speak up and
Okay.
interrupt, and I'm happy to go off on whatever tangent would be useful to you. So let me, having
Perfect.
said
Ditto.
that, let me do my screen share here. Um, so uh, talking about ethics and the impact on AI on mediation. Some time ago, there was a study of the modes of mediation that are in play around the world. And the ultimate outcome of that study was that there are basically 50 different identifiable modes of mediation around the world with some commonalities, but also with some differences. And so when we talk about the impact of anything on the ethics of mediation, it gets to be a relatively complicated concept because of the notion of how many types of mediation there are. Pardon me. But the desire across all those modes of mediation is to do two things. One is to operate ethically, and the other is to create a safe space for the parties who are coming into mediation. And so, as we talk about AI, particularly, I want to talk about how to operate ethically, but also what a safe space might mean in an environment where you're using artificial intelligence. A colleague of mine basically defines safety as reducing the negative outcomes to an acceptable level. And I think that's a pretty good definition to work with as a mediator. And surrounding that with the notion of ethics is if you can make something safer, you must do so to be operating ethically. If there's a way to be safer, then you really have to sort of figure out where that is and what that looks like. There are many ethics and standards of practice offering guidelines regarding what safe means and how to address the use of AI with parties. There are tons of them that are out there. I want to sort of narrow down and basically target technology standards that were developed by the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution and the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution. You can find them at icoder.org/standards. These were developed essentially over the last 15 years to address the notion of what one should be doing or not doing as a mediator when you're beginning to integrate technology into your practice. We started talking about these before artificial intelligence was really an issue, but we've recently added a lot of information about artificial intelligence into the standards themselves. And as you all very well know, the notion of the impact of AI on mediation is a large enough topic that we could talk about it all day long. We could go off in lots of different directions. What I want to do for the purposes of this short introduction, and hopefully we can have Q&A to follow, is to narrow down to a couple of points. These are the elements of the standards of practice that NCTDR and ICODER has put together. And I think for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to concentrate on the notion of confidential operations and confidentiality and competence, especially as competence affects self-determination. Self-determination, in my experience, is about as close to being a universal in mediation as you can get. It isn't universal. There are some, in fact, I spent many years dealing with mediation that was not totally voluntary. So self-determination isn't an absolute across the board, but it is as close as you're going to get. So I want to concentrate on these because of two reasons. One, I think confidentiality is probably the thing that comes up most often when people talk about artificial intelligence and mediation. And competence to me is one of the most important elements of operating effectively and ethically in a safe environment for the parties. So this is my bias sort of showing through a little bit in terms of what I've chosen to talk about today. Basically, using any technology, including AI, changes what you can say about confidentiality. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, when we were first talking about the integration of technology into dispute resolution, the notion of the fourth party was born by Ethan Cash and Janet Rifkin in a book they wrote in 2001. And you don't have to be online. You don't have to be using a cloud computer in order to have an impact with the use of technology. Basically, when I'm operating in a totally face-to-face environment with paper being passed across the table, when I get through with that mediation, when I'm done, I can tell the parties, I'm going to keep your agreement to mediate. I'm going to keep the agreement if there was one. And anything else I've developed, any notes, anything I have, I'm going to destroy. And I'm not going to break your confidentiality because somebody comes and finds things that I'm holding or that get shared inadvertently through the notes that I've made. When you start using technology, you have to alter the way you talk about that. Um, Essentially, when you're using AI or any other cloud technology, what that really means is that you're using somebody else's computer and you're giving up total control. So when you talk about confidentiality, you have to talk about confidentiality in the environment in which you're operating. And the environment in which you're operating when you use AI technology is that there is somebody else's computer at work. And actually using AI gives that notion of somebody else's computer sort of legs and makes it more important actually than it is when you're using something like Zoom or some other video sharing operation. So, confidentiality. Questions of confidentiality are concerned with what happens to data before, during, and after mediation. So, when you're thinking about the notion of confidentiality and when you talk about it with the parties, it's a permeating element in mediation. Before mediation, one of the things that I suggest that you do with the parties is do a risk damage assessment to see whether using AI is dangerous and what kind of AI to use. And when I talk about a risk damage assessment, I mean, what is the risk that the information that you're sharing will wind up either inadvertently or intentionally shared with someone who shouldn't see it? And if the risk is high, then look at the damage. What would be the damage if this information were inadvertently shared or inappropriately shared? If the damage is nil, if I don't mind seeing it on the front page of the Washington Post tomorrow, then the risk element doesn't really matter. But I have dealt with many clients who have indicated to me that the damage would be so great if their confidential and proprietary information was shared that we don't use technology at all. We put it in paper and send it across town with a courier. So this whole notion of a risk damage assessment, again, has legs with artificial intelligence that it doesn't have with regular technology. Although regular technology is interesting enough in and of itself, I would argue that email is probably the worst thing to use. It's probably the highest risk because everybody has at one time or another made a mistake with sharing information over email. You've probably gotten an email that you shouldn't have gotten, or you sent an email to someone you shouldn't have sent it to. AI puts a cloud around that. And so before you go into a virtual environment that you create with your parties using artificial intelligence, there are some questions that I'll get to in a little bit that you should be asking about what happens to the data that you're using with those parties. And toward the end of this, I'll talk a little bit very specifically about some questions that you can ask and how you can do this risk damage assessment. Oops, sorry about that. If you look at the NCTDR iCoder standards, this is a paragraph that's there under confidentiality that's added some information about artificial intelligence. So you can go to the standards themselves and have a look and see what else is there. Also, before you begin working with artificial intelligence in your parties, one of the things that I believe firmly, one of the things that I preach to the folks that I work with, is that if you're going to put, even if the artificial intelligence application that you're using is a RAG and is separated off from the large LLMs like ChatGPT and Cloud, et cetera, even if if it's separated off, what I try to do is anonymize the data that we use as much as possible. If you're talking about one or two email chains, if you're talking about one or two documents, this isn't terribly difficult. But it becomes a lot more difficult if you're talking about a lot of data. There is, if you want to have a look at something that's going to be really, really useful, earlier this week in Cyberweek, Bob Bergman talked about his new program called the Anonymizer, which actually does this for you with large bits of data. And obviously, the utility of this is that you're putting information up at somebody else's computer. You're putting up in an app that you don't completely control. And if you anonymize the data as best you can, then the chances of that data harming someone or even being used inadvertently or inappropriately to train an LLM goes way, way down. During mediation, be aware of how the AI handles your party's data. Does it feed the LLM or is it a RAG or partitioned off? Essentially, you can ask these questions of an AI program on the front end, and theoretically, you should be able to get answers to most of the questions about how they handle your data. After mediation, keeping data offline or anonymizing your records is part of the whole notion of confidentiality. We tend to think of confidentiality as we're not going to break confidentiality during the mediation itself. But for example, I was talking with someone who had put together an AI app for arbitration, and one of the questions I asked was, what do you do with the data after you're done? What happens to the information that you've put in about the arbitration case after you're finished? And their answer was, well, it's kept in an offline computer for a year in case there's an issue, and then we delete it from the hard drive. That's about as good as it gets. But having said that, a forensics investigator could go to the hard drive and probably pull that information up if they wanted to do so. So the notion of how the data is kept after you're done with it, it becomes very important. Because a breach of security could reveal a lot about old cases that would be inappropriate. So I guess the bottom line of what I'm trying to say here is that confidentiality under artificial intelligence gets to be a little bit complicated because it has to do with what the data set is from which the AI learns, whether or not your data feeds that large language model, that data set, how the data is kept while you're using it, and how the data is stored after you're through using it. And so all of those things are things that as a mediator thinking about using an AI program, you want to at least consider and be able to talk to your parties about before you begin to use an AI program. I mean, the way I think about all of this is that you are inviting your parties into a virtual room. You're inviting them onto a virtual table. You have a responsibility to make sure that that virtual table takes care of their information and takes care of them in a safe environment where their data is not misused. And that's before, during, and after the mediation process itself. There are some draft iCoder notes on confidentiality, again, that you can find in the NCDDR and iCoder standards. Competence and self-determination. The reason I link these is that competence is, in any situation for a mediator, an interesting topic. And by interesting, I mean thorny. What makes a competent mediator? Is it that I've completed a 40-hour course? Is it that I have a degree in dispute resolution? Is it that I've done 1,000 mediations? In any of those cases, I could have not paid attention in my training. I could have barely gotten through my course, and I could have done 1,000 badly. So the idea of how you determine what competent is for a mediator is a thorny one in the first place. When you add AI to the mix, again, it sort of gives it legs. There is no need to be an AI expert if you're a mediator, but there are some things that you ought to pay attention to and that you ought to know. Competence in my book in AI means knowing the basics of how AI works and being able to ask the right questions about the AI program you're thinking about using so that you understand how it's operating, and then being able to explain that to the parties in such a way that they can exercise self-determine when they say, yes, I'll join you in that mediation. And self-determination, we sometimes tend to think of that as the party's ability to stay in mediation or to choose to leave mediation and to make a resolution or to not make a resolution. But self-determination starts before the mediation starts. The first step in self-determination is when the parties say to you, okay, this is what you're going to do. You explained it to me. Yes, I'll go with you there. I'll join that process with you. And so when you're talking about using artificial intelligence, um, what that means for you as a mediator is that you need to be able to understand how the system that you're thinking about using works, knowing what that will do with the parties' data and what it'll do with their interaction, and being able to explain that to the parties in a way that makes sense to them so that they understand what they're getting into when they say yes to you. And again, the draft iCoder notes, if you want to go look at those, they're out there for you to see. So questions to ask. I think there are three basic questions to start off with that mediators have to ask when they start to use AI. The first is, should I use AI? I go back to the 50 ways to leave your lover, the 50 ways to do mediation. Forget the tech altogether and look at your process. What is it that you do? Because not every mediator does things the same way. I was involved for a number of years in a National Science Foundation research project where we were looking very early on, in fact, the very first one, to look at what is the impact of technology on mediation. And the way we started out that research was we invited professional mediators in and said, essentially, what do you do? And they told us what they did, and we built a model. And then we invited another set of professional mediators in and said, is that what you do? And they said, well, yeah, that's what we do most of the time, but sometimes we do this, sometimes we do that. Okay, so now we have exceptions to the model. Then we invited another set of mediators in and said, did we get it? Is this what you do? Well, yeah, that's what we do most of the time, but sometimes we do this. So we wound up with more exceptions than we did rules. And so what I strongly urge you to do if you're thinking about using AI is don't think about the AI first. Think first about the functions that you perform, the things that you do as a mediator, and then ask yourself, of those things that are there, what is AI good at? What does it do well? And the application that I'm thinking about using, what is it designed to do? How does it operate? And how does it fit into the functions that I have to fulfill as a third party? And so that's the first question that you ask is, should I use it in the first place? And then the second is, okay, if I'm going to use it, what should I use? Which of the applications that are out there are going to be appropriate for me? When ChatGPT hit back a couple of years ago, essentially what we were looking at were large language models that were sort of foundational and universal. What we see happening now and what we're going to see happening more and more and more into the future is that there are going to be a tsunami of AI applications that are designed to target specific marketplaces and specific uses. So divorce mediation, family mediation, whatever. You're going to have lots of options. And so again, look at the functions that you're performing, see how the AI performs those functions for you, and then make a choice about what you should use based on what matches your process and what matches the way that you do work. The third question that's an overriding question for mediators in use of AI is, what do I tell the parties about the AI? Do I tell them that I am using it? Do I discuss with them whether they can use it? Do I tell them that they have to disclose that they're using it on the side that I don't know about unless they tell me? What is the conversation that I should have with the parties about artificial intelligence and the work that we're about to do? In some ways, the use of an artificial intelligence application may be no different than asking your colleague for advice. My wife is a much better mediator than I am. If I got stuck in a mediation, I wouldn't hesitate to go say, "Hey, Julie, I got this problem. Give me some ideas." I wouldn't necessarily go back to the parties and say, "Well, Julia told me to do this," but I might not. And so, in some ways, using an artificial intelligence program to get prompts and to get information and to get ideas isn't an awful lot unlike talking to colleagues about the process as you're going through it. But in a way, it is quite different because you're going outside the human interaction and going to a program that has been written by somebody with parameters that were developed by somebody that is giving you information that may or may not be biased. There are lots of things to think about when you start talking about using an artificial intelligence program. And I think as part of competence and as part of self-determination, it's up to you to be able to talk to the parties about that in a way that makes sense for your process. If you're going to use it only, for example, I noticed just today there's an announcement about a new application that's coming out that uses AI to do your intake as a mediation uh, consulting firm. Um, do you have to tell them that you're using that, or is that just part of doing business and part of the back office? I think that's a less of an important question than if I'm going to, in the middle of our mediation, ask the AI for recommended resolutions, then I really have to think about how I'm going to handle that information with the parties. And I'm not saying that there's a right way to do it. What I am saying is that you need to talk to the parties about it and that there needs to be a transparency in the way that you use the technology. So those are, to me, some fundamental questions that you ask on the front end of yourself. Should I use it? What should I use? What do I tell the parties about it? There's another set of questions, and these are a shortened version from things that I worked out in a book that I did a while ago. Questions that you ask of the AI itself. Um, what is the data set from which the AI learns? Essentially, as a colleague of mine says, AI is a mimic. It does not go outside the data set that you give it. It predicts based on that data set, which is one of the reasons why it can make up things and hallucinate. So if the data set is biased, then the outcome is going to be biased. If the data set is broad, maybe that's better, maybe it's not. If the data set is narrow, is it appropriately narrow? Again, I was talking to the same people about the arbitration program they put together. And I said, what's the data set from which your AI learns? It learns from published decisions from arbitrators in the state where we're using it. And for me, that was a good answer. If it had been more general, maybe that would have been a good answer too. But I was quite impressed that they had picked the data set that specifically talked about information from the area where they were going to be working. That's one of the things you run into with artificial intelligence is um, what is appropriate in one venue may not be appropriate in another venue when you start getting recommendations. I've seen this a couple of times in the legal world with things that were perfectly okay in one state or not okay in another state, but the artificial intelligence may or may not know that. So anyway, that's the first question. What's the data set? The second question you would ask is what are the security protocols that you operate under as an organization? Is there information about potential bias in the AI? If the program has been around for any length of time, someone will have done some research about the potential bias, and you could probably find that information out. Does my data feed the learning data set, or is my data walled off from the LLM that's feeding the data set? How is my information stored and accessed, and how is my information destroyed after the session's closed? If you can if you can get answers to all of these questions, that would give you some idea of how the AI you're considering using works. That would give you an idea about whether it fits with the functions that you have to perform, and it will give you a good idea of what to say to your parties when you talk to them about inviting them into that AI environment. So there is no perfect answer to any of these, but the bottom line is that you are, as a mediator, it is incumbent upon you to ask questions of the AI that you're going to use that allow you to understand how it works so that you can know whether there's a safe environment you're creating or whether there are some pitfalls that might be there. Those are fundamental things that you have to do as a third party, even before you begin talking to the parties. That is my rush through to try to make sure we have some time left over. Um, I'll be happy to take Q&A now. Or Claire, do you want to wait and do Q&A all at the end, or what do you want to do?
If people have questions, absolutely jump in now. Um, uh, but if I'm not hearing any questions, I'm probably just going to jump in and start talking. So that's okay.
Go for it.
All right. Okay. So here we go. I did put the slides in. I put a link to the slides in the chat, and then this is also a QR code to be able to access those. So, this is where I'm seeing a lot of people right now as they're discussing AI, and they're just saying, I don't have time to learn it. I don't have time to understand it. And we're like, but this can really save you time. They're like, I just don't even have time to set it up. And I get that, right? We are all completely overburdened and we're all stressed, and I understand. But here's what I've seen. If you can take about an hour to set up an AI tool. So Dan, I just did this last week with an invoicing tool. So it's funny that you mentioned that, and then an intake one the week before. So I took about an hour, right? Got everything all set up. And now it's just running in the background doing this work for me. But part of that hour, I made sure to also include about 5 minutes where I really try to dig deep into the settings, right? How are you storing the data? How long are you storing the data? Are you training on the data? Is the data redacted? Is there anything that you're going to send me that would betray confidentiality? And then, of course, you set up a dummy account. And I tried doing a couple dummy intakes and dummy invoices just so I could see exactly as a party, what questions are they asking? And then as a mediator, what information are they sending to me? Because I want to make sure I can turn off any kind of an email send, right? That they're not like emailing me, oh, here's your client's social security number and their bank statements, right? So all of this to say, yes, I know it takes a little bit of time to do this work that Dan and I are talking about, but the payoff is so worth it because then it does save you a ton of time. And more than that, you're keeping your client's trust, right? You're not betraying their confidentiality by taking that hour and digging deep and making sure that you've done everything right in the beginning. Okay. So, essentially what we're talking about is AI perfect? It's really cool. It's a lot of fun to play with. It can definitely save us time. But I think we can all agree it's not perfect, right? And so I don't think that means that we stop using it. I think it's just we have to understand what are the risks, right? It's just like saying, is a hammer perfect, right? How do you answer that question? It's a great tool. Can it also really hurt your thumb? Absolutely. So it's not that we don't use it. We just have to understand how do we use it safely. Okay. Um, I want to begin by addressing I think I feel like maybe in Dublin I gave a presentation on my concerns in AI, and I have to backpedal on a couple of those, just things that have changed since that Dublin conference. So one of my first concerns was that initially clients are going to want that very first contact to be with a person, that they want there to be the warm, welcoming face, right? They want there to be a smile, somebody greeting them and letting them know that everything is going to be okay. Um, there's this image in my head very clearly. I was in labor with my third kid, right? We got stuck in traffic and it was so and it's so stressful. And then we finally pull into the hospital and there was this woman standing there. And in my head, she kind of looked like Mrs. Claus. And again, in my head, I know this isn't real, but there were a lot of hormones at the time. I feel like there was this kind of golden halo glow around her. And she just stood there with open arms and she said, it's okay, honey, I'll take care of you. Just come here. And then everything was okay, right? She got me wheeled in, everything was fine. And in our head, I think that's what we think our clients are expecting, right? That there's going to be this mediator that says, you've made it, things have been so rough, but don't worry, now I'm going to take care of you. And for some clients and for some cases, that is the right approach, right? Some clients still want that warm, fuzzy, I'm here, I'm going to take care of you. But I have a bunch of teenagers and they do not want that interaction. That feels too intimidating. It feels too personal before they have the lay of the land. What they want is to be able to communicate on their phone, right? Um, they want to have a lower risk, right? A lower obstacle. They want to have something that they know is not going to judge them in any way, where they can just get all of their feelings out at 3 in the morning. They can take their time to process things, take as much time as they need, say things, and then rewrite things, and then not be judged for how they say things. And these are going to be our clients in the next 5 years. And we're starting to see them enter the office now. And simply, I'm just seeing clients that are more comfortable putting things into an online intake form. I want to make sure I've got multiple doors leading into my mediation office. I'm never going to close that physical door where we can be that warm, welcoming smile. But all of this to say, boy, I think we're dealing with clients that are going to not just be more comfortable, but in some situations prefer to have that robotic intake form that isn't going to judge anything they say. We could talk about the impact of that on our society later. But all I'm saying right now is this used to be a major concern. I felt like this crossed a major ethical violation, and I don't think so anymore. Another big concern that I used to have was on typos and hallucinations, and that AI was putting faulty information out there, right? We can all think of some pretty funny cases where people assumed something was true and it was not. But boy, the data is just saying that this is not as much of a concern anymore. Is it still a concern? Yeah, right? We still have to make sure that the information that's being spit out is accurate. But as they start looking at tests, they are realizing that humans make up a lot more than AI does. And humans assume that they are correct, whereas AI says, I don't know if this is correct. This is where I got the data from. I don't know if this is from a real case or if this was from a student role play. I don't know, but I'll provide you the link. You can determine for yourself. So, when we are looking at data now, I'm starting to trust AI data quite a bit more. Not because it's perfect, but because, gosh, it's a lot easier to inspect and dig down into than it is to try to dig down into my brain. Um, I still don't think I trust AI that much yet when it comes to emotions. I've tried using some of the AI feeling finders in the middle of mediations and meetings just for fun, just to see how accurate it is. And it's pretty dang close. But I don't think it's picking up on some of the micro expressions that we as mediators have been trained to notice. Okay. So all of this to say, as we are starting to incorporate it, I am less nervous about us crossing a line when we add AI in the beginning. And I am less nervous now about looking at the data that AI is spitting out because it's doing such a good job at telling us where that data came from. And we're starting to see AI tools that are incredibly trustworthy. Things like LexisNexis, Spellbook, BlueJ. Oh, they're incredible. I have links to all those in the slides. Okay, so now starting to get in what are some of my current concerns. Dan, you already touched on some of these, so I'm going to sound like a broken record. But it's just us reinforcing each other. It's good. So my first concern is, when do we disclose to our clients that we are using an AI tool? And I've been working with quite a few different groups, International Bar Association, of course, American Arbitration Association, because I work there. And I, I've been working at ODR.com, trying to develop these groups or trying to develop these standards. And the main concern that people seem to have is we do not want to add an AI tool into the middle of the process and have it interacting with our clients when it does one of these two things. If it could influence their interest or if it could influence their agreement. Okay, so that's our main concern for incorporating an AI tool into the middle of the mediation itself. Our concerns outside of the mediation are, but what's it doing with the data, right? If I'm putting an intake form in there, how is it storing that data? Okay, so as we are looking at how to use an AI tool, Dan already mentioned this. We really have to think about the timing of it. So I'm going to break this down in a second where I think where different where different concerns come in at different points in the process, right? Again, just like using a tool. I'm going to use a hammer when I'm building the house, but when I'm ready to paint, it's not time to use the hammer anymore, right? We just have to use a different tool. Same thing in mediation. Let's just think about the impact of different tools at different points. So again, I have a timeline. I'll show you in just a second what I mean by that. Um, uh, Another concern that I have is the unauthorized practice of law. If I were to put a chatbot on my website, and without any introduction, without any disclaimer, and just put it out there and tell my clients, hey, go use this if you have questions. And if that chatbot said something like, hey, you should sue the other person, or you should plan to settle for $1 million, then what am I doing there, right? I am offering legal advice, and you know who's on the hook for it? It's not the designer, it's not the website, it's not the client that put information, probably faulty information in. It's me, because I was the one who put that tool in the hands of my clients. So over and over, courts are deciding it is the person who builds the bridge. It's the person who makes the connection between the tool and the person who used it badly. They're the one that's at fault. So again, I'm not saying we don't use these tools, but we've just got to be really aware of where the data is being saved, what the outcome looks like, and what point in the process we are exposing our clients to these tools. Okay. I realize I'm saying a bunch of bigger theoretical concepts now. I'll make this practical in just a second. But again, my concern is let's make sure we are doing our due diligence, right? Take that initial hour when you're setting up an AI tool to find out how is it recording the data? Is it going to affect how my client is thinking about their interest or the agreement? And at what point, well, and what kind of data is it spitting out to them? So here is my little takeaway from this. As you are trying to decide if you should use a tool, look at the outcome that it's sharing with your clients. Is it saying you should do this, or is it saying, here are 3 options that you could use? Because I'm much more comfortable with that, right? I don't feel like that's crossing a gray line for me as a mediator. I feel like it's just saying, I'm going to give you some information, do with it what you will. All right. So, some other concerns I want to mention, again, just as we're talking about ethics and concerns, a big one people have been talking about is what's going to happen to my job and to my hours. If it used to take me 10 hours to draft an agreement, and now it's only taking me 1 because I'm using an AI tool, what do I do? It's an ethical dilemma, right? Do I charge my clients less? Do I only charge them for 1 hour? Do I charge them for a full 10 hours? Or do I increase my rates? Or do I just have to increase my clients? What is the right decision here? So, what we're seeing a lot of people do, a lot. I was actually very surprised at our conference a couple weeks ago. We did a quick survey, just a little impromptu Gallup survey, and half of the people at that conference had already switched to doing a flat fee instead of billing by the hour. So I think we're really going to start to see that shift, especially as AI saves us time, right? I'm not any less effective. It's not like I'm not delivering a mediation agreement. So I still want to charge for it, but I also want to make sure that I can sleep at night, right? That I'm operating with integrity. So instead, we're seeing people give a flat fee. Sometimes we can use AI and it'll save us time. Sometimes we won't, but now we know it'll even out. Okay. Another big thing that we're starting to see is people saying, AI is going to take over my job. To be honest, I'm not seeing that as a really big concern. Instead, what we're seeing is they're anticipating about 50% of our kind of white collar jobs, right, where we're sitting at a computer most of the time. About 50% of those jobs should anticipate that they need to shift. We're not going to lose the jobs, but people need to be prepared to have a big AI shift. So instead of hiring a person for something, we are probably going to be hiring a designer to get us an AI tool to do that. Or I need to learn the AI tool that is going to do that. This is just simply so that to save us time, and especially with Spellbook, I'm starting to see that this is making our agreements a little bit more durable, right? In a lot of cases, it increases our quality. Not always, right? Sometimes AI is really stupid and it can make us look stupid if we're not looking at the results it spits out. But um, but there's a lot of time where it provides information that just makes me a better mediator. And then finally, we're just starting to see a lot of clients are expecting to have those kinds of bells and whistles added to our practice. Okay. So, Dan mentioned the iCoder standards. What Colin and I did was we hired a bunch of people and we had them sit together for the day and we asked them what should be the checklist as mediators are trying to decide if they should incorporate an AI tool. And I said, I want you to design this for my 80-year-old mom, right? Somebody who has no idea what GPT means, and she doesn't need to, right? She doesn't know what LLM or NLP means, and that's okay. She just knows here's a cool tool, and she needs a set of questions to decide, is this safe? Is it something that I should add to my practice? Is it something that's worth my time, worth my money? So I included a link to this. This is a summary of that conversation as we were all deciding together, how do we know if it's a good tool or not? All right. So quick summary as I am look to add to what Dan said, the two additional pieces I want to add to that are, let's be very aware of where we are in our mediation process as far as if we can use an AI tool or not. And let's be very aware of the outcome of these tools. Let's make sure it's saying, here's three things you could do, right? I'm providing information instead of here's what you should do, which is when it is providing legal advice. And for me, again, that's where we're starting to cross the line. Okay, so here's my very fancy, very professional summary of everything I just said. Where do we add AI? We can add a lot of AI to the beginning of the process, right? That's things like our intake, our scheduling, our calendar, our marketing, our social media, all of that, because that's not going to have as much of an impact on our client's interest or their agreement. And they're not putting as much data in at that point. Once we start getting right about here, this is our client's intake. So now I need to start being a little pickier, right? This is why I'm saying think about where you are in the timing of the process. Let's add lots of fun tools here. And also at the end of the process, this is when I can use an invoicing tool and I want to use it for things like can you send a reminder to my clients because they haven't paid me? Or what is my average hourly rate for these types of cases? Right? It's fun to use AI for those reports. It's fun to use AI for ongoing marketing and surveys and evaluations. This middle section, though, we just have to be a little more cautious, right? This is where I need to be a little pickier because now it's not just me that could get burned. Now it's my clients as well, because now this could be my client's personal data. It could be their interests. It could be long-term solutions that are going to affect them. And I don't want AI to have as much of an influence there. All right. So if you take nothing else away from my section, just remember the dog bone, right? If you're looking at an AI for the beginning of the process or the end of the process, you have a little bit more freedom. If we're using it in the middle, we have to be very picky and go through the settings and find out what's happening with our data. And we also have to get our clients' permission before we use it. So beginning and end, I don't disclose to my clients that I'm using AI, right? They don't have to know that I'm using it um, for my calendaring or my marketing or to arrange my social media stuff. At the end, I have AI sending them surveys. I don't tell them it's AI. In the middle of the process, though, that's when I say, hey, I think I have an AI tool that could help us. What do we think? Do we want to try using it? I want to make sure that I have everybody's buy-in, and then we're sitting and going through it together so I can monitor the results in case it does hallucinate something crazy. All right. So when we are looking at what we should use, um, this is kind of this is how I picture it. Like I always kind of picture that there's this line right above my laptop, and I want to keep all of my clients' PII nice here and hidden, right? Their personally identifiable information, their name, their email, their address, social security, bank statements, right? All of that stuff I want to keep nice and safe here below the line. When I'm putting information into the cloud, that's where I can put my anonymized information. Um, I would ask a very generic, give me a sample parenting agreement. Or, hey, I have a husband and wife getting a divorce. Can you show me three possible parenting plans for them? Right? That's all anonymized data. So I'm fine putting that kind of information into the cloud. But this little line for me, and again, I just picture it right above my laptop. To me, that's a filter that, and I just make sure that I don't have any of my clients' personal data crossing that line. Okay. I don't know. That's helpful for me. Maybe that image is helpful for you. All right. We have a lot of people that are trying to figure out how to use GPTs. So you can tell I'm really an image person, right? I needed an image to understand how this works and how I can use it safely. Okay, let's say that you're going to chat GPT. I want you to think of it like you're in a huge public park And it's a lot of fun, but anything and everything can happen. All right. This is where, as Dan was mentioning earlier, um, ChatGPT has been pre-trained on everything, right? Um, the, I don't know, the weirdo sitting in his garage who likes to smell doll hair, right? He's putting information into ChatGPT. But then you also have some amazing arbitration awards. You also have LexisNexis putting information in there. So you've got the good and the bad. And it's just like you're sitting in a public park, right? You don't know what's going to happen. Somebody might be juggling, somebody might be swallowing a sword with fire on it. You've got somebody selling cotton candy. It's anything and everything. It's the wild web. And then GPT takes that data and it transforms it into something cool and it hands it back to you and it says, "Is this what you wanted? Like, I think you asked for a balloon animal. Is this right?" And you're going to take it and say, close, but I really wanted a pink dog, not a yellow banana. I don't know. Okay, so that's when you're using something like ChatGPT, you are just in a huge park. But if you start to use some private GPTs, I'll show you what that means in just a second. We can take a minute and build one. Then essentially what you've done is you have built your own house, okay? And within this house, you have set up walls, you've set up doors, you are furnishing it with exactly the data you want, and you get to decide who comes in and out of that door. All right. This is if you are building your own very private GPT or if you are using something private to yourself. Is it 100% safe? No, there's still windows, right? There's still little ways that people could try to peek in and try to get an understanding of what kind of data packets you're sending. So it is much safer. This is where I am much more comfortable putting a lot more details about my case, but I'm still going to be cautious, right? Um, I have a couple GPTs I'll show you in a second that I built. So these are my houses. I built them on my data. Um, so when I was when I was very first building one, I wanted to make sure that I was very strict about the data that it was coming from, right? I don't want it to be getting data from the whole park, from the whole internet. Instead, I said, I just want you to respond from these couple of things. So I added some PDFs of different sections of my book. Now, I have a bunch of sections in my book where I compare mediation to baking, which is fine if you're reading it in the context of the book and it's kind of tongue in cheek. I'm just being funny. The problem with this was the GPT didn't know I was just being funny. And when I had a sample client in there with a sample case and they were so upset and, oh, this horrible thing just happened to me. And the GPT spit back, "That's hard, but everything will be better if you eat a brownie." Which is funny if you know it's in the context of my book, but if it's actually providing that advice to a client as if it's real legal advice, that's where I can get in trouble. So, as you are building these GPTs, which I strongly recommend, they're fun, and I'm going to show you how to do it in just a second here. As you're building these GPTs, we want to be very cautious about the kind of data we're putting in there, right? If you're just putting in a couple of articles that compare mediation to baking, that's all the information it has, and that's the information it's going to provide your clients. Um, John Landy did a great one where he uploaded a whole bunch of his articles, his anonymized agreements, and so that GPT has a lot more information to give better advice. I built one to give advice, and I just uploaded all of our stuff from mediate.com. AAA built one where it uploaded its anonymized arbitration agreements. Ken Cloak is building one where Ken Cloak has uploaded all of his articles and books. And now this GPT is designed to respond as if it were Ken Cloak. Okay, so, so as you are starting to go through these, and if you want to use a GPT to get some advice, I think it's great, but let's take a second. And I think I have an example pulled up. Um, Hold on. I'm just going to stop sharing so I can make sure I'm looking at the right thing before I share my screen. Oh yeah, here we go. We're good. Okay. So as you decide that you want to, oh my gosh, share screen. There it is. Just took a second. All right. Um, so if you want to start interacting with your clients and start using tools in the middle of the process, right? This is where we have to be a little stricter. This is where I would probably create something myself. And so to do that, it's really not hard. I can walk you through it. Honestly, ChatGPT can walk you through it really well. You'll just come over here to chatgpt.slash GPTs. And then there are some really cool curated GPTs in here. And this is what I would strongly recommend using instead of ChatGPT as a whole, right? As we're considering ethics, we have to realize if we're using all of ChatGPT, we're getting information from that huge park. And anybody and everybody can put really weird information in there. So you can't quite trust the information you're getting back. If you are asking it a question, something like, I want to research, I want to use LexisNexis to get specific information on this case. I want to debrief what just happened in this case. This is when I would go to one of these GPTs to make sure that you're getting curated data, right? You're not getting data from the whole World Wide Web now, but you're getting somebody who went through and they said, nope, this is a better source of information. It's going to give you better results. Okay. So these are all publicly available ones. What I did was I created a private one that's just for me or just for my clients. I clicked create. It said, what do you want to make? I said, I want you to make a mediator proposal. Um, as soon as we're done, I want you to delete the chat. Don't save any of the data. If you want to know how to do that safely, then you can also get a set of data privacy rules in here. So this helps me to feel like it's a little safer. It gives my clients prompts, things like do not include name, phone number, address, don't include case number. If they're starting to type that in, then the GPT stops them. It says, hey, for compliance, I need you to remove that information. Um, it and and then all of the data needs to be instantly deleted. It cannot be trained on. This GPT cannot be trained on any data that my clients put in. So I created a GPT because I wanted there to be like a safe chatbot that we could use to talk through things. And I wanted to make sure that this GPT wasn't training on any of my data, it wasn't storing data, it wasn't sending data, that you can't go back through chats and look at previous data that has been stored or previous questions that have been asked. So here is what I got. Badoo, badoo. Here we go. Here's what I got. I'll just show you this one as an example. A mediator proposal studio. And the idea here is I can use this in the middle of the mediation. And I've said, I don't want you to ask questions that could influence my party's interest or where it could influence the agreement, right? Because if I'm in the middle of the mediation, that's that thin part of the dog bone where now I need to be very cautious and tread very lightly. But we still want to use AI. We just want to do it safely. So here's an example. In this GPT, I could say something like, please give me a proposal for a parenting plan with a husband and wife. They have 3 kids. She is deployed 5 months out of the year. He is able to travel. They want close contact with kids, as close to 50-50 split as possible. So now if I try to put in some confidential information, then it's going to tell me, whoa, we don't want that. Just give me the generics, and then I can give you back some information. Okay, and again, I've prompted this on my agreements, on some sample articles and agreements from mediate.com. So it should respond from that data set. Okay, this is something Dan talked about a lot. We want to be really cautious what data set we're using. I don't want it to pull from the wild web, right? Because then it could say something like, oh yeah, you should send your kid to Disneyland or just send him to boarding school for 6 months. I don't know what it's going to suggest. But I pre-planted some really good data in here so that I have a little bit more confidence in what data it's spitting back out. So now it's giving me some pretty good parenting time schedules, some good ideas. And remember, I'm sitting here with my parties, so we can look through this together and say, here's one that could work. Here's an idea that could work. Remember, I want to make sure that I'm not doing that unauthorized practice of law where I'm using an AI tool to inadvertently influence my client's decision, right? I don't want to do something that says, hey, here's legal advice. This is what you should do. But I think if we're stuck in the middle of a mediation, this is where we can safely use AI to say, gosh, we're stuck, but let's get some information from the tool. Okay. So creating your own GPT is one way to do that, to make sure you have confidence in what data it's suggesting and what data it's spitting out. I want to show you two others that I feel pretty confident about. How come this isn't coming up? There it is. Here's one I really like. It's called Blue Jay Legal. And this is a tax and accounting AI. And it has the same kind of information as the IRS, but the IRS AI tool is as efficient as you would expect it to be. So I found that this one works much better. So if I'm in the middle of a mediation and I'm stuck with my clients and they just need a little bit of information. It used to be that we would pause the mediation, they would go out, they would hire a tax attorney, they'd figure it out, then we'd reschedule the mediation for a couple weeks later. But now I can say, hey, I have this really cool AI tool. Should we put your question in and see if we can get some good responses? And then it spits out the responses. And then this is where I would also say, let's click on the links to find out where that information came from to make sure we trust it. I want to show you one more. Um, I can use this as an example. Okay, so there's one more tool I really like. This is an add-on to Microsoft Word. Why do I like that? Because then this is a tool that I can use to analyze my agreements, and it can look at my party's interests because it's all staying below that line. Um, Remember, I mentioned here, we want to be really careful to not let my client's information go into the cloud, right? I want to picture I have a filter. So this I like because it's an add-on to Microsoft Word. What that means is it's something that just lives in my computer. It's analyzing my client's information inside my computer, so I don't have to upload anything. All right, so this is an add-on. It's called Spellbook. And this just goes through my agreements to make sure that I'm writing a good agreement, right? To make sure that it's being written in a way that complies with that jurisdiction, that the language is unambiguous, and to make sure that I'm including all of the clauses that I should so that this is an enforceable, durable agreement. Okay, so I just want to finish up by saying, let me make this big so we can all see this. Um, I think we have a lot of people, I think we have people on both ends of the spectrum who are either saying AI is so confusing, I'm just not going to use it at all, or I'm not going to take the time to understand how it works. I'm just going to trust that everything's fine. I think as mediators, our responsibility is to be right in the middle, to say, it is kind of confusing and it's new and I don't like change, but I'm going to figure it out. And I'm also going to take the extra 5 minutes with every tool to go through the settings and make sure it's not training on my data, make sure it's not storing my client's information and it's not going to send it anywhere, but that I come into the tool to make sure it's in there safely, right? So let's take the time to use these tools and make sure that we're using them wisely because I think it's important for us to realize that there are a lot of AI tools out there that are actively trying to get out our clients' information, right? This is their bread and butter. This is how they make their money. So it's our job to use them, but to use them in a way where we are always thinking about our clients' data and are we putting the right safeguards around them? Okay, that was the main stuff that I wanted to talk about. Um, it looks like some chats came in. I think I missed them.
Yeah, there was a question, first of all, about access to your slides. People were having trouble getting to them.
Yeah, I think you might. If you want to download them, then I think you do need a Canva account, but you can access them. You should still be able to view them just fine.
Do you have Google Drive? Do you use that?
I do. I
Yeah,
could download them and
if you
put them in
stick it
Google
there and
Drive.
share, then I can get us there as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine.
Any questions for anybody? Any comments? Anything we can deal with?
Um, Yeah, my slide should be posted here. Here, I'll add them again right there. Come on. Copy. Should be at the top of our chat. There we are.
Anything at all?
I
We're
hope
already done.
everybody's feeling a little bit more confident now that that we don't just jump in and use AI tools willy-nilly, but that we also shouldn't be avoiding them, right? I think there is a way that we can use them. We just want to make sure we're using them safely. Going through the settings, thinking about where it's storing our client's data and what kind of information it's spitting out. Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Claire.
Yeah, this is fun. All
Yeah.
right. Well,
If
if
there are no
anything,
questions, I guess we're finished, huh?
perfect.
Yeah. I'm